Devonshire, September 1812. The letter had arrived on a Wednesday, which was the day her father conducted his correspondence with the efficiency of someone who believed that business delayed was business declined, and who had applied this principle to every area of his life, including his daughter. The letter was from Lord Ashcroft, her father's oldest creditor and newest ally, a man whose friendship operated on the same terms as his loans, generous in appearance and binding in practice. It concerned a matter of domestic staffing at the estate of His Grace, the Duke of Southerton, who required a woman of good breeding and practical capability to serve as household companion to his elderly mother, the Dowager Duchess, for a period of no fewer than 6 months. The position was, Lord Ashcroft's letter continued, an excellent opportunity. Élodie Marchand read this at the breakfast table in her father's house in Warwickshire, a house that had once been among the finest in the county and was now among the most carefully maintained illusions, and she understood 3 things simultaneously. First, that the position was not an opportunity. Second, that her father owed Lord Ashcroft a sum that required either repayment or a gesture of equivalent weight. And third, that she was the gesture. Her father, Clement Marchand, sat across the table with the composed attention of someone who had already decided the matter and was now performing the appearance of consultation. He was 53, lean, precise in his dress and his debts, and he loved his daughter in the way that certain men love their daughters, completely, and without allowing it to interfere with what he considered necessary. "Southerton is a fine house," he said. "The Duke is well regarded. The Dowager is elderly but sharp. You will find the situation comfortable." Élodie set the letter down. She looked at her father with the direct, unblinking attention she had inherited from her mother, who had died when Élodie was 11, and had left behind a daughter with her composure, her penmanship, and her absolute refusal to be managed without acknowledgement. "You are sending me away," she said. "I am placing you in an excellent household. You are settling a debt." Her father was quiet for a moment. The morning light came through the breakfast room windows and illuminated the careful repairs in the wallpaper and the places where paintings had been removed and replaced with smaller ones. "I'm doing what is required," he said, "as I have always done." Élodie looked at the letter again. She looked at the phrase, household companion, which meant something between a guest and a servant, and occupied the precise social territory where a gentleman's daughter could be placed without anyone having to call it what it was. She thought about what it meant to be 23 and unmarried, and the daughter of a man whose fortune had been declining for a decade. She thought about the word, required, and what it meant when her father used it, which was that the alternative had been considered and found worse. "How long?" she said. 6 months, perhaps longer, depending on the Dowager's needs. "And if I refuse?" Her father looked at her with the expression she had catalogued at 14, the one that said he had calculated the consequences and was not going to share them. "I would prefer," he said carefully, "that you did not refuse." "When do I leave?" she said. "Friday." 2 days. He had given her 2 days, which meant he had known about this for longer, and had waited until the arrangement was settled before telling her, so that the conversation was about logistics rather than consent. She packed her trunk on Thursday with methodical attention. 3 morning dresses, 2 evening dresses, her writing case, her mother's pearl brooch which she wore every day, and a volume of Cowper's poems she had been reading since August and had not finished because August had been the month the latest creditor had called, and she had lost the ability to concentrate on verse. She left on Friday morning in a hired carriage because the family carriage had been sold in June. The drive to Devonshire took 2 days. She arrived at Southerton on a Sunday afternoon in the 2nd week of September, when the light was doing what September light does in Devonshire, which is to make everything look as though it has been there forever and intends to remain. Southerton was larger than she had expected. It sat in its grounds, with the settled authority of a house built by people who assumed their descendants would live in it for centuries and who had been correct. She was met at the door by Mrs. Calloway, the housekeeper, who assessed Elodie in the doorway with the quick, comprehensive attention of someone cataloging a new variable in an established system. "Miss Marchand, we have been expecting you. His Grace will receive you in the morning. I will show you to your rooms." Rooms. Plural. She had expected a room. She followed Mrs. Calloway through the entrance hall, up the main staircase to a suite on the second floor that was larger than the entire upper story of her father's house. She stood in the sitting room and looked at the view of the south gardens and thought about a hired carriage and a packed trunk and a father who had called this an opportunity. She set her writing case on the desk and her mother's brooch on the dressing table and began the process of existing in a place that was not hers, for reasons that were not hers, with the composure of someone who had been adapting to circumstances she had not chosen since she was 11 years old. She did not unpack the Cowper. She was not in the mood for poetry. He received her at 10 the following morning in the study, a room that faced the morning sun and was furnished with spare, deliberate taste. The desk was large and orderly. The shelves held ledgers and estate records rather than decorative volumes. She noted this, as she noted all rooms, as evidence. The Duke of Southerton was 31. Lord Ashcroft's letter had said he was a man of serious temperament and excellent reputation. It had not said that he was tall and dark-haired and had the particular quality of stillness that belonged to people who had learned to keep themselves contained, not from nature, but from practice. He stood when she entered. He did not smile. "Miss Marchand, please sit." She sat. He sat. He looked at her across the desk with the flat, efficient attention of a person who had decided what he needed and was determining whether she matched the specification. "Lord Ashcroft has explained the arrangement," he said. "He has explained it to my father. My father has explained it to me." "Then you understand the position." "I understand the terms. Household companion to the Dowager Duchess. 6 months. The Dowager requires consistent attention. She is 78. Her health is sound, but her temperament is not patient, and she has dismissed 3 companions in 18 months. The household requires someone who can manage the situation without requiring management themselves." Elodie looked at the controlled way he delivered this information, as though he were describing the drainage requirements of a difficult field, rather than the care of his mother. "You are telling me that the position is difficult," she said. "I am telling you that the position has defeated 3 women who were considered capable. And you believe I will fare differently because Lord Ashcroft recommended me, or because my father's debt makes refusal inconvenient." The room was very quiet. The September morning laid itself across the desk between them. "Miss Marchand," he said, and his voice had acquired the edge of a man not accustomed to being read accurately by strangers. "Your father's arrangement with Lord Ashcroft is not my concern. My concern is the effective operation of this household. I require a companion for my mother who will be present, capable, and who will not attempt to impose herself beyond the boundaries of the position." He paused. "This is a household, not a salon. I need someone who understands the distinction and who will conduct herself within it." Elodie looked at him across the desk. She looked at the controlled stillness and the careful word choices and the way he had said, "impose herself," as though it were a clinical term rather than a warning. And she understood that the 3 dismissed companions hadn't failed because they were incapable. They had failed because they had been people, with opinions and presence and the inconvenient quality of existing beyond the margins he had drawn for them. She understood something else, the controlled stillness, the insistence on boundaries and positions. This was not a man describing what he needed. This was a man describing what he could tolerate. And the distance between those two things was the distance created by something that had happened to him that she did not yet know. "You have been disappointed," she said. The stillness changed. It became a different kind of still, the kind that meant she had touched something he had not expected to be visible. "I beg your pardon. The 3 companions. You chose them, and they did not meet the requirements because the requirements were not really about capability. They were about control. And control is what people need when they have been in a situation where they did not have it." The study was silent except for the clock on the mantelpiece. "I do not know what happened to you," she said, "and it is not my business. But I want you to understand that I am here because my father's debts require it, not because I sought the position, and I will care for your mother with the attention she deserves, and I will conduct myself within whatever boundaries you set, and none of that means I have agreed to be invisible." He looked at her with something less managed, the look of someone who had just been told something true by a person he had expected to be manageable. "6 months," he said. "We will review the arrangement at the end of the period." "Agreed," she said. She stood. She had not been dismissed, and she had not asked permission to stand, and both of these facts registered in the room. She walked to the study door. She placed her hand on the handle, and then she turned back to him and did something she had not planned. She looked at him directly, held his gaze for 2 full seconds, and then she inclined her head. Not a curtsy, not a bow. A slow, deliberate inclination that acknowledged his rank and his authority over the household she was entering, and that simultaneously communicated, with a precision that required no words, that acknowledgement and submission were not the same thing. It was the kind of gesture her mother had known how to perform in every room she had ever entered and left. It lasted exactly long enough to be unmistakable, and not 1 moment longer. Then she opened the door and walked through it, and closed it behind her with the soft, definitive sound of concluded business. She stood in the corridor for 3 seconds. She breathed. She had shown him. Not argued, not protested, not performed the gratitude the arrangement technically required. She had shown him that the woman sent to his house as settlement for a debt was not the woman he had prepared himself to receive. She thought about what she had seen in his face in the moment after the inclination, the fraction of a second before she turned to the door. Not anger, and not surprise precisely, but the disorientation of someone whose assessment had just been contradicted by evidence he had not anticipated. She went to meet the Dowager. The Dowager Duchess of Southerton was 78 years old and had the quality of someone who had spent 5 decades in a house she considered hers, regardless of whose name appeared on the deed, and who regarded each new companion as an inconvenience to be endured until it revealed itself to be intolerable. She received Elodie in the morning room. She did not invite her to sit. "You are Marchand's daughter," the Dowager said. "I am. He owes Ashcroft money." "He does. The last 3 were terrified of me. Are you terrified of me?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you have told me that the last 3 were, which means you are either warning me or testing me, and in either case the honest answer serves better than the frightened one." The Dowager was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sit down, Miss Marchand." Elodie sat, and the 6 months began. They were, as the Duke had warned, difficult. The Dowager was sharp and demanding. She required reading for 2 hours each morning, walking in the gardens each afternoon, and the management, without acknowledgement or instruction, of the dozen small tasks that kept her daily life operating at the standard she had maintained for 50 years. Elodie did all of it. She did not complain or falter. And she did not, which was the thing the Dowager noticed first, attempt to make herself agreeable. She was competent and present and direct, and when the dowager said something cutting, Elodie received it with the steady gaze of someone who had heard worse from creditors in her father's drawing room, and had learned that the appropriate response to sharpness was not retreat, but clarity. By the end of the second week, the dowager had stopped testing her. By the end of the third, the dowager had begun talking to her, which was different from talking at her, and which the household noticed. What the household also noticed was that Elodie had begun making herself useful beyond the dowager's rooms. The linen inventory had not been reconciled in 2 quarters. She corrected it on a Tuesday afternoon, while the dowager napped, without being asked, and left the ledger on Mrs. Calloway's desk with a note that said, "I believe columns 4 and 7 were transposed. I have corrected them. Please verify." Mrs. Calloway verified. The columns had been transposed. She said nothing to Elodie about this, and nothing to the Duke. The silence in both directions was the particular silence of a housekeeper who was recalculating. This was Elodie's counter-move, though she would not have called it that. She thought in terms of competence, which was the thing she had, the thing her father's debts could not diminish, the thing that lived in her hands and her attention and her capacity to walk into a room and understand what it needed. She was not going to be invisible, but she was not going to be loud. She was going to be so thoroughly, quietly capable that the household would rearrange itself around her presence without anyone deciding it should. She had been at Southerton for 3 weeks before she spoke to the Duke again. He ran a large estate, and his days simply did not intersect with hers. But she saw him. She saw him crossing the entrance hall. She saw him at the far end of the south garden with his steward. She saw him once from the dowager's window, standing at the edge of the lake in the late afternoon with that practiced stillness. And she watched him for longer than was necessary, and then returned to the correspondence with focused discipline. The dowager, who missed nothing, said on the Thursday of the 3rd week, "My son keeps to himself." "I have noticed," Elodie said, turning a page. "He was not always this way. His wife died, a 1.5 years ago, scarlet fever. She was 26. The room was quiet. The afternoon light fell across the dowager's folded hands. "I'm sorry," Elodie said. He loved her completely, and she died, and he has spent the time since converting the grief into order. The estate has never run better. The accounts have never been more precise. Every element of this household operates exactly as he has determined it should, because if everything is in its correct position, then nothing else can go wrong, and he can continue to function without having to feel anything that is not a number on a ledger." She looked at Elodie. The 3 companions. He did not dismiss them because they were incapable. He dismissed them because they had feelings at him. They saw a grieving man and attempted sympathy, and sympathy is the one thing he cannot tolerate, because tolerating it would require him to acknowledge what he is grieving, and he has decided that acknowledgement is inefficient. Elodie sat with this. She sat with how it rearranged everything she had understood about the study interview. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I am telling you because you are the first companion who has not already guessed and begun performing consolation. You have been here 3 weeks, and you have not once looked at him with pity. I find this promising." The encounter she had been expecting came the following Monday. She was in the still room, sorting dried herbs into their correct jars, and discovering that the rose water had been stored next to the turpentine. She was on a step stool, reaching for a jar on the highest shelf, when the Duke appeared in the doorway. He stopped. She looked at him from approximately 3 inches above his eyeline, which was not the angle she would have chosen, but which had the unintended effect of reversing the physical dynamic of their first meeting entirely. "Miss Marchand," he said, "Your Grace." He looked at the relabeled jars and the sorted herbs, and the turpentine relocated to the opposite shelf. His expression underwent a sequence of adjustments she followed with interest. "You have reorganized the stillroom," he said. "I have corrected the stillroom. The rose water was stored beside the turpentine. 3 tincture bottles had no labels at all." She stepped down from the stool. She was back below his eye line, but something about the encounter had changed the register of the conversation. "I did not ask you to do this," he said. "No. Your position is companion to the Dowager." "My position is companion to the Dowager. The stillroom is not part of my position. I organized it because it needed organizing, and because it is not in my nature to walk past something that is wrong and leave it wrong." They held each other's gaze. The September light came through the small, high window and threw bright squares across the stone floor between them. "The linen inventory," he said. "Mrs. Calloway informed me that the ledger had been corrected. The handwriting was not hers. The columns were transposed. I corrected them." His gaze held hers for a moment that lasted longer than the information required. "You have been here 3 weeks," he said. "In 3 weeks, you have reorganized the stillroom, corrected the linen inventory, and made my mother speak in complete sentences at dinner for the first time in 6 months. Mrs. Calloway has begun leaving household matters on your desk that she has not left on anyone's desk since the previous housekeeper retired." "I told you this was a household," he said, "not a salon." "It is a household," she said. "I am treating it as one." His gaze was no longer the flat, efficient attention from the study. It had curiosity in it, and an edge of something else she was not going to name in a stillroom. He turned to leave. At the doorway, he stopped, without turning back. "The kitchen garden, the planting rotation. If you have opinions, Mrs. Calloway would value them." Then he left. And Elodie stood among the relabeled jars and thought about the fact that he could not bring himself to say, "I would value them," and had routed the sentence through his housekeeper instead. October brought rain to Devonshire, and with the rain came the problem that had been building since before Elodie's arrival: the east wing roof. 3 sections of lead flashing had failed, and water was coming through the ceiling of the long gallery, which contained the family portrait collection, approximately 9,000 pounds of painted canvas. Elodie heard it. She was reading to the Dowager on a Tuesday morning when the sound of water hitting stone came from above. A dark stain was spreading across the ceiling. "That is the roof," the Dowager said. "It has been the roof since August. My son has been informed. The repairs have been postponed repeatedly because the lead supplier in Exeter has been unreliable." Elodie went to the long gallery. Water was pooling beneath 2 of the largest portraits. A bucket had been placed beneath the worst drip by someone who had understood the urgency but not the scale. The second Duke's full-length oil was developing a dark line along the lower edge of the frame, where moisture was wicking upward. She found the steward, Hathaway, and described the situation with precise, unsentimental language. "The portraits need moving immediately. The flashing needs repair before the next rainfall, which will be tomorrow. There is a supplier in Plymouth who can deliver within 3 days. I inquired this morning." She did not wait for his response. She went to the study. She knocked. She entered without waiting for an answer. The Duke looked up. "The long gallery roof is failing," she said. "Water is pooling beneath the portraits. The second Duke is taking moisture through the frame. I need your authorization for emergency repair of the east wing flashing, and I need it before tomorrow morning." He set down his pen. "You entered without knocking," he said. "I knocked. I did not wait. The distinction matters. Your ceiling is leaking onto 9,000 pounds of family portraits, and the protocol for entering your study is less important than the protocol for preserving them." Something happened in his face. She almost missed it. But she had been watching this face for a month, and what she saw was the corner of his mouth move in a direction that wasn't displeasure. "Show me," he said. They went to the long gallery together. He looked at the water, the portraits, the ceiling stain spreading with the insistence of a problem that had been waiting for someone to take it seriously. "You inquired about a Plymouth supplier," he said. "I asked Mrs. Calloway who the alternatives were. She knew immediately, which tells you she has been waiting for someone to ask the right question. Authorize the Plymouth supplier," he said. "Mrs. Calloway will give you access to the household accounts for the expenditure." "Thank you," she said. "Miss Marchand, the next time you enter my study, you may continue to knock without waiting. The protocol is, as you observed, less important than the ceiling." She inclined her head. The same slow, deliberate inclination from the first morning, but different now. The first time it had said, "I acknowledge you, and I am not submitting." This time it said something closer to, "I see what you just did, and I am noting it." He saw the difference. She saw him see it. The gallery repair began that afternoon, and the portraits were saved. That evening she wrote in her journal, "He gave me access to the household accounts." She understood what it meant. The household accounts were not the province of a companion. They were the province of a wife or a housekeeper, or someone whose position had moved beyond the boundaries he had drawn on her first morning. She had crossed a line, and instead of redrawing it, he had moved it. The Southerton Harvest Supper was held in the last week of October, a tradition that predated the current Duke by 3 generations. 30 guests, the full county. The long dining room opened for the first time since the previous Duchess's funeral. Elodie had not expected to attend. She was a companion, but the Dowager disabused her of this on the Monday before. "You will attend. You will sit at my right. You will wear something that is not brown." "I have a green silk," Elodie said. "You will wear the green silk, and my son will place you at the table because I have told him to, and because he has not argued, which tells you everything about how the household accounting has shifted in the 6 weeks you have been here." Elodie wore the green silk. She wore her mother's pearl brooch at the collar. She came down the main staircase with the composed stride of someone who understood that the quality of an entrance was determined not by what you wore, but by whether you believed you had a right to be there. The Duke was receiving the early arrivals. He looked up when she appeared. He looked at the green silk and the pearl brooch and the stride, and something crossed his expression that was too quick for the room to catch, but not too quick for her. What she saw was recognition, not of the dress, of her. The dinner proceeded with the efficiency of long practice. Elodie talked with Sir Arthur Hadley, the county magistrate, about the roads, and with Mrs. Trevelyan about the autumn preserving. She was aware of the Duke at the head of the table, and aware that his attention was directed toward her end, with a frequency that was consistent. The difficulty came between the second and third courses, and it came from Lady Varnum. Lady Varnum was the wife of Sir Edmund Varnum, whose estate bordered Southerton to the north. She had been a close friend of the late Duchess, and had spent the time since the funeral maintaining the late Duchess's memory with the devotion of someone who preferred the dead version of a friendship to the complicated work of forming a new one. She had been watching Elodie all evening. "Miss Marchand," Lady Varnum said, in a voice pitched to carry exactly as far as she wanted. "How are you finding Southerton? It must be quite a change from Warwickshire." "It is a beautiful house. I am very comfortable. And so useful, having a companion for the Dowager. Such a practical arrangement." The pause had the quality of something rehearsed. "I understand your father is in trade. Manchester, is it? Textiles, originally. How enterprising. And the position here, the companionship, was that arranged through Lord Ashcroft? I seem to recall hearing that there was an arrangement." The word arrangement did the work she had designed it to do. In this room, spoken by this woman, with the emphasis she placed on it, it meant, "I know why you are here. I know about the debt. I know you are not a guest, but a transaction, and I want the table to know it too." Elodie looked at Lady Varnum and felt the attention of 20 people waiting to see whether she would retreat or respond. She was drawing breath to respond when the Duke spoke. "Miss Marchand," the Duke said, in a voice she had not heard before. Lower than the study voice, carrying the weight of someone who had held authority in this room for 8 years and rarely deployed it socially because the room already understood it, and who was deploying it now with precise, economical force. "Miss Marchand has reorganized the household stores, corrected the estate linen accounts, and coordinated the emergency repair of the east wing roof, which preserved the family portrait collection that has been in this house for 4 generations. He looked at Lady Varnum. "The arrangement, as you describe it, has been of considerable benefit to this household. I consider myself fortunate in it." Lady Varnum's smile underwent a rapid recalibration. Sir Edmund developed an interest in his wine glass. The Dowager picked up her fork with the composure of someone watching her son do something she had been waiting to see. The dinner continued. Elodie did not look at the Duke for the remainder of the meal. She conducted herself with the attention of someone managing a room capably and who did not require rescue. But she had been defended, and the distinction between rescue and defense was one she was going to have to think about, because the defense had not been about her weakness. It had been about his position. He had said, in front of his county, that she was of value to his household, and he had said it with the authority of someone who expected the room to accept his assessment. After dinner, the Dowager appeared at her elbow. "Lady Varnum will be more careful now," the Dowager said. "Yes. My son does not speak at dinner unless the matter requires it. He considers social performance inefficient. You understand what it means that he spoke." Elodie looked across the room at the Duke. "He made it about the household," she said quietly. "He did not make it about me. He made it about the household so that Lady Varnum could not accuse him of sentiment, so that the room heard a practical assessment rather than a personal declaration, and so that you were supported without being diminished by the supporting." The Dowager paused. "That is not a man defending a household asset, Miss Marchand. That is a man who has decided something and has not yet told himself what it is." He came to find her 2 days later. She was in the kitchen garden, kneeling in the soil, her hands in the earth, a smudge on her sleeve that she was aware of and had decided not to care about. "Miss Marchand," he said. She looked up. She did not stand. The kneeling was not deference, it was labor. "Your Grace, I owe you an apology," he said. She waited, in the study, on your first morning. "What I said about boundaries and imposing yourself, I spoke to you as though you were a problem to be managed. I spoke as though the women who came before had taught me everything I needed to know about the woman standing in front of me, and I had not looked at you long enough to learn otherwise." He was looking at the garden wall rather than at her. "I was wrong. The boundaries I described were not about you. They were about what I could tolerate. I had confused the two, and the confusion was mine." She stood. She brushed the soil from her hands. "I knew," she said. "In the study, on the first morning. I knew the boundaries were not about me. I did not know why, not then. Your mother told me about your wife in the 3rd week." Something moved in his face. Not surprise. Something closer to relief. The relief of someone who has been carrying a weight privately and has just learned that another person was aware of it. "I am not a replacement for her," Elodie said. "I am not a correction for her absence." "I know," he said. "Do you?" "I have known it since the still room, since you stood on that step stool and told me the rose water was stored next to the turpentine, and looked at me as though the turpentine were the most important thing in the world, and neither of us found it strange. She looked at the garden around them, the rows she had planted, the herbs she had relocated, the evidence of weeks of quiet, deliberate work done in soil that was not hers, on an estate that was not hers, for reasons that were not hers. And she made a decision. She gestured toward the path that led to the south lawn. "Walk with me," she said. It was not an invitation a companion issued to a duke. It was not within the boundaries he had drawn, or the ones she had been observing. She crossed the line deliberately, and she watched him decide whether to follow her across it. He followed. They walked the south path in the October afternoon, the lake flat and gray, the trees turning toward November. Neither spoke for the first 100 yards, which was the distance it took for the formality to settle into something that was simply two people walking beside each other in a silence that had more in it than most conversations. "The harvest supper," she said. "What you said to Lady Varnum. It was accurate. It was also more than accurate. You did not need to say it." He walked 3 steps before he answered. "No, I did not need to say it." "Why did you?" He looked at the lake. He looked at the flat gray surface that reflected the October sky and the trees and nothing of what was underneath. "Because she was wrong about you," he said. "And I was the person in that room who knew it most completely and was most obligated to say so." He paused. "And because I have spent 6 weeks watching you repair this household from the still room to the roof, and it occurred to me at that table that I had never once told you that I had noticed." The sentence landed in the space between them and stayed there, and neither of them picked it up, and neither of them walked away from it, and the path curved around the lake and brought them back toward the house in the late afternoon light. At the garden door, she stopped. She turned to him. She performed the inclination. The third one, slower than the first, more deliberate than the second. She held it for a beat longer, and when she raised her head, she met his eyes, and the inclination said, "I see you. Not the Duke, not the widower. You." He received it. She saw the recognition, the understanding that the gesture he had now seen 3 times was not the same gesture repeated, but a language being developed between them, and that each iteration carried more than the last. "Good evening, Your Grace," she said. "Good evening, Miss Marchand," he said, and his voice had something in it that had not been there in the study on the first morning, something that was going to cost them both considerably before it was finished. November at Southerton had the quality of a house settling into itself, the fires lit, the curtains drawn early, the intimacy of a large estate in winter when the world contracts to the distance between the fireplace and the window. The Dowager had taken to keeping Elodie later into the evenings, partly because the cold made her joints ache, and partly because she was conducting an observation with patience. "He reads in the library until midnight," the Dowager said on a Wednesday evening. "He has done this since Catherine died. Reading is thinking, and thinking is what he does instead of feeling, and midnight is the hour when the choice between the two becomes unavoidable." "You are telling me this for a reason," Elodie said. "I am telling you this because the library is warm, and the books are good, and because a woman who has reorganized everything in this house, except the library, is, I suspect, running out of rooms to avoid." She went to the library at 9. The door was open. The fire was lit. He was in the chair by the window, with a volume she could not identify from the doorway. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. "May I?" she said. He closed his book. "Of course," he said, and the 2 words carried more weight than any sentence he had spoken to her, because, of course, meant her presence was not being permitted, but recognized as appropriate. She sat in the chair across from his. She had brought the cowper. They read in each other's company, and nothing happened, and everything happened, because the nothing that happened was two people who had been circling the same truth for weeks, deciding, without discussion, to occupy the same room without pretense. They did this for 4 evenings. On the 5th, he spoke. "You have not turned a page in 20 minutes." She looked up. "Neither have you." He set his book down. He looked at the fire. "Catherine," he said. The name arrived in the library with the weight of a word that had not been spoken in this room for over a year. She was not what people assume. She was not gentle or quiet. She was sharp and difficult, and she argued with me about everything, and she was right about most of it, and I loved her for the arguing more than for anything else, because the arguing meant she saw me clearly enough to disagree, and being seen clearly is not something that happens to dukes. He paused. When she died, I lost the person who argued with me, and I replaced her with order, with boundaries and positions and efficient operation. And it worked. And then you arrived, and you have spent weeks arguing with my household in exactly the way she argued with me, and I have been trying to determine whether this is unbearable or essential, and I have concluded that it is both. Elodie set her book down. "I need to tell you something," she said. "My father sent me here as payment for a debt. You know this. What you do not know is that I agreed to come not because I had no choice, but because I had spent 2 years watching my father's house contract around me, and I was disappearing inside it. I was becoming the woman who managed the decline, and when the letter came, I was angry and humiliated, and also, and this is the thing I have not admitted to anyone, relieved. Because being needed for my competence was better than being needed for my compliance, and I would rather be sent somewhere as a punishment than stay somewhere as a ghost. You are not a punishment, he said. His voice had dropped below any register she had catalogued into something that was simply a man saying a true thing. And you are not a function, she said. You are not the efficient operation of a household. You are a man who loved someone and lost her and built a system to survive it. And I am standing in the place where it stopped working. And I did not ask to be here, but I am here. And I am not going to pretend that being here has not changed everything. He stood. He crossed the distance between the 2 chairs, which was 4 feet of library carpet, and weeks of boundary, and 3 inclinations of her head, and 1 harvest supper, and 1 apology in a kitchen garden. "The 6 months," he said. She looked up at him. She did not stand. Whatever this was, it was going to begin with her sitting in his library, in his chair, with her book in her lap. "What about the 6 months?" she said. "I do not want you to leave at the end of them." The sentence was the most unmanaged thing the Duke of Southerton had said in over a year, and they both knew it. She closed her book. She placed it on the side table. She stood, and the standing was her choice, and the timing was her choice, and every element of this moment was something she had decided rather than something that had happened to her. "Then ask me to stay," she said. "Not as a companion, not as an arrangement. Ask me as yourself." "Stay," he said. "Elodie, stay." Her name. Not Miss Marchant. Her name in his voice in his library. She did not incline her head. The gesture was absent, deliberately, completely, and the absence said everything the presence had been building toward. She reached up and placed her hand flat against his chest, over his heart, the same deliberate precision she brought to labels on tincture bottles and rose in a kitchen garden and every true thing she had ever decided. "I will stay," she said, "because I need someone who sees that arguing as how I love things, and you are the first person who has understood that since my mother died." He covered her hand with his. He kissed her. It was not tentative. It had the honesty of someone who had spent weeks revising every assessment he had made. She kissed him back with the directness she brought to ledgers and gardens and every true thing she had ever done, and the cowper lay unopened on the side table, and neither of them required any further evidence. He proposed on a Thursday morning in the kitchen garden, which was the place where he had apologized, and where her hands had been in the soil, and which belonged to the version of them that was honest and practical and smelled of earth. "I have a proposal," he said. "You have brought me to a garden to deliver it. The setting suggests it is not about drainage." The corner of his mouth moved, the almost smile. She had decided sometime in October that it was her favorite thing about his face. "I am asking you to marry me," he said. "I am asking badly, because you are looking at me with the expression that means you have already decided and are waiting for me to finish arriving at the same conclusion." "That is the expression," she confirmed. Elodie. William. His name. She had not used it before. It was in the kitchen garden between the winter lettuces and the relocated herbs, and it was not going back. "I'm not a conventional choice," she said. "I have no fortune. My father is in debt. Lady Varnum will be appalled." "Lady Varnum is already appalled. The condition is chronic and requires no further provocation." "Yes," she said. "Yes, as in you accept." "Yes, as in I accept, and yes, as in I intend to reorganize the Southerton Library, which has no discernible system." "The library has a system." "The library has the memory of a system. I intend to provide it with an actual one." He took her hand. He held it with the firm, deliberate grip of a man who meant what he agreed to, and she held his with the same grip, and they stood in the kitchen garden in the November morning. And the proposal was not romantic in the way that proposals were supposed to be romantic, and it was perfect in the way that things are perfect when they are true. The dowager received the news with the composure of someone who had been expecting it since the 3rd week, and who had been exercising a patience she did not naturally possess in order to allow events to arrive at their correct conclusion without interference. "Well," the dowager said. "Well," Elodie agreed. "He proposed to his first wife in the ballroom," the dowager said. "He proposed to you in a vegetable garden. I find this a significant improvement." She looked at Elodie with the knowing attention that had not softened in 78 years and wasn't going to soften now. "He has been happy for approximately 3 days. He shows it almost invisibly. But I have been reading that face for 31 years, and the invisible thing is happiness. And I have not seen it since before Catherine. And I am telling you this not because you need to hear it, but because I want it said aloud in a room, so that it is real." She paused. "Write to your father. Tell him the debt is settled in a way he did not anticipate and doesn't deserve. And tell him that his daughter is going to be a duchess, which is not a reward for his financial mismanagement, but is, I suspect, the only good thing to come of it." Elodie wrote to her father that evening. The letter took 1 draft, which was unusual, because letters to her father generally required multiple attempts to achieve the balance between honesty and restraint that their relationship demanded. This letter required only 1 draft because she was not writing with restraint, and the woman sitting at the desk in the Southerton suite was not the woman who had arrived in September, and the difference was not something she could compress into diplomacy. Her father's reply arrived 4 days later. It was brief. It said, "I sent you as payment. You have returned as interest. The rate is better than I deserve. Your father." She read it twice. She put it in the desk drawer. She went to find William, because she wanted to show it to someone who would understand why it was both the worst and the best thing her father had ever written. The engagement was announced at the Christmas dinner at Southerton. 35 guests, the full county, the silver and the candelabra, and Mrs. Calloway's personal supervision. Elodie was seated at the Duke's right, which was where a future duchess belonged. and which said everything that needed saying to every person in the room without requiring a single word. She wore the green silk. She wore her mother's pearl brooch. She walked into the dining room on William's arm, and the room received her with the attention of a county that had been following this story since September and had been waiting, with the invested patience of people who lived in close proximity and noticed everything, for the conclusion they had suspected was coming. Sir Arthur congratulated them with genuine warmth. Mrs. Trevelyan congratulated them with tears, because she had been the first person outside the household to notice how the Duke looked at Miss Marchand during the harvest supper, and she had told her husband, and he had said she saw things that were not there, and she was now vindicated, which made the tears as much about marital satisfaction as romantic joy. Lady Varnum congratulated them with the grace of someone who had determined that graciousness was the only viable position. She said the correct things. She said them to William first, and then to Elodie, and when she met Elodie's eyes, the exchange lasted 3 seconds and contained the complete renegotiation of a relationship that Lady Varnum had entered as a judge and was exiting as an equal, and neither of them needed to acknowledge it aloud for it to be permanently understood. The Dowager caught Elodie's eye across the table during the second course, and the look she gave her was not the sharp, assessing one from the first morning, and not the knowing one from the weeks that followed, but something simpler and rarer, which was the look of someone who was pleased and who did not find the occasion for that expression often enough to waste it on understatement. "You are doing well," Elodie said to William quietly during a pause. "I am always doing well." "You are always doing adequately. Tonight, you are doing well. The distinction is visible." His eyes met hers, the almost smile becoming the real one. "You are going to spend the rest of our marriage noting the distinction between adequate and well. I'm going to spend the rest of our marriage ensuring that you understand the difference, which will require considerable attention and very little patience. You have attention. You have never had patience. I have patience for things that deserve it. You deserve it. Barely." They were married in January, which was not the conventional month for a wedding in Devonshire, but which was the month that made sense, because neither of them was interested in waiting for spring, and because January had a quality of stripped-back honesty that suited them both. She wore dark green. William had not been surprised. The Dowager had not been surprised. Her father had simply nodded. Her father came from Warwickshire the day before in a hired carriage, because the family carriage was still sold. "Is he good enough for you?" her father said. She gave it the honest consideration it deserved. "He's becoming good enough," she said, which is the best version of the answer, because it means the work is ongoing and the direction is correct. Her father nodded. "Your mother would have liked him." "My mother would have corrected him, frequently and with precision. The resemblance has been noted." Her father laughed. It was the first full laugh she had heard from him in 2 years. The county attended. Sir Arthur, the Trevelyans, Mrs. Calloway in the back row, Lady Varnum in the second row, in a hat slightly too elaborate for a January wedding, that said, through the language of millinery, that she had accepted the situation and intended to be noticed accepting it. The Dowager sat in the front row. She did not weep. She watched her son with the clear attention of someone who had been waiting for the system he had built to break, and who was now watching it be replaced by something less orderly and infinitely more alive. Elodie walked down the aisle on her father's arm. She looked at William, and he looked at her, and his face had nothing of the study in it, nothing of the first morning. It was the undefended expression from the library, the one that said he had revised every assessment and arrived at a conclusion that wasn't a conclusion at all, but a beginning. She reached the front. She stood beside him. He took her hand. She did not incline her head. The gesture that had defined every encounter between them, the slow, deliberate acknowledgement that had said, in sequence, "I see you, and I am not submitting. Then, I am noting what you did. Then, I see you, not the Duke, you. And then had been deliberately absent in the library, when its absence said, I am no longer performing for you, was absent now for the final time. And the absence was the completion. She did not need the gesture. She was past the inclination. She had arrived at the place where it was no longer necessary, because everything it had ever said was now simply true, present, and permanent, woven into the way she stood beside him, and the way he held her hand, and the way the January light fell across both of them equally. They were married. The vicar read the service. The dowager watched with satisfied eyes. Lady Varnum behaved impeccably. Mrs. Calloway wept. William found her in the East Garden in the late afternoon, when the January light was doing its final honest work. The roses are in the wrong beds, she said. I know. And the library begins tomorrow. I expected nothing less. And the rotation schedule needs revising. His eyes found hers. Elodie. William, you were sent here as a punishment. I was. And within a month, I was begging you to stay. You were not begging. You were revising a position. There is a distinction. The distinction is that begging would have been easier. Revising required admitting I was wrong, which is considerably more expensive. She leaned into him, slightly, the smallest shift of weight, and he received it. And they stood in the January garden of a house that had been standing for 200 years, and that was, for the first time in over a year, being lived in rather than managed. She thought about the inclination, the first one in the study doorway, the second in the long gallery after the roof, the third at the garden door after the walk around the lake, the absence of it in the library, the absence of it in the church. 5 versions of a gesture, each one carrying more than the last. The final version was no gesture at all, because the woman who had needed to communicate her dignity through a tilt of her head had arrived at a place where dignity was not performed, but inhabited, not signaled, but lived. The best decisions, she said, are the ones you understand better after you have made them than before. Your mother, he said. My father, actually. It is the only wise thing he has ever said. He said it about textiles. I am applying it more broadly. He laughed, small and private and real, the laugh of a man who had not laughed in over a year, and who was discovering that the muscles still worked, and that the woman beside him was the reason they had remembered how. The January evening settled around them. The house behind them was warm and lit, and full of the sound of a household that had been shaken from its managed efficiency into something messier and more human and immeasurably better. Elodie Marchand, now the Duchess of Southerton, stood in the garden with her hand in her husband's, and understood, with the clarity she brought to all true things, that she had been sent to this house as a punishment, and had made it a home, and that the making was the best work she had ever done, and that the work was just beginning.